This looks like an interrogation.
We are yes. Please say your name.
Behind the mirror.
Just don't fall down, please.
Okay, so hi everybody, thank you for getting here. Now I'm a bit too far from my notes, so I guess I will just like improvise a little bit over. Do you hear me like this? Okay. So, hello, nice to meet you. Thank you, Andre, for the invitation one more time. And yeah, I'm going to present interface cultures and our labs and a little bit of the work and the work of the students and what we're trying to do there. The lecture is called the Laboratory and Heterotopia, and yeah, you will understand. So yeah, so I'm Fabricio, and yes, please, could you turn it off? Thank you. Yeah, this one? Yeah. I mean, is it too dark? Nobody's gonna see this. Oh my God, it's such a normality. Thank you. Okay, so my name is Fabricio. I'm Fabricio Lamoncha. I'm an artist, and I'm also working at the university. I have a background in art and also in architecture, and then I did a master in stage design, which I thought it was like a cool way to combine the two. So staging is perhaps, like one way in which I see also my practice and my research and how I can put together my curiosities. So yeah, I work as a lecturer and kind of a producer or curator, following the process of the student projects. I also take care and maintain the laboratories at Interface Cultures, which is part of the infrastructure and the methodologies that we are following in this department, which are really more practice-based and learning through this kind of learning tools and trial error methods, etc. So, yeah, as a department which kind of morphing or expanding curriculum with students coming from many different countries with many different kind of curiosities and many different backgrounds. We found there a very kind of a very interesting, a very interesting space, full of different kind of ingredients, where a lot of very situations that could not happen elsewhere sometimes happen in our department. I am also taking care of inviting scientists and artists during the Ars Electronica festival in a process that is called Leonardo Laser. I don't know if you've heard this kind of an international network of rendezvous for artists and scientists organized through the Leonardo Journal and also through the MIT Press. So basically it's kind of a platform for for networking and for bringing together scientists and having conversation and discuss collaboration, but also discuss perhaps infrastructure, how they work in the lab, and all these notions of interdisciplinarity, cross-disciplinarity, etc. So for me, the combination of the two, it's pretty nice because on the one hand we have the day-to-day work at the department, then you have this kind of conversations with artists and scientists through this Leonardo, and then slowly we are articulating and we are finding this kind of parallel paths, and then bringing perhaps scientists and artists to our department to to also give some lectures or to make workshops, and through this process we are also like acquiring perhaps new infrastructures and new tools and new knowledge that then somebody, either the students or I or people, they need to maintain. But I guess like with departments that they are working with new technologies or new or different kind of like modes of interdisciplinarity, or like trying to articulate different kind of entanglements and connections to maintain and to create these situations, it becomes crucial. I also work at the Sci Center in UCLA in Los Angeles, which is also a special place that offers mentorships to new scholars, new students that they are about to start or they already started their studies in UCLA, which is a university that offers both scientific and humanities, to help them to decide or to help them to go through this process, that is very important for them, where they have the feeling that they have to choose between like going for the arts or going for the science, or going for humanities, and help them through this process to also like telling them that there is nothing to fear, that there is possibility to shift like from one to the other, to jump from another, and yeah, I guess it is kind of like a bit natural to me to go through this process, because I guess like many of you that are working in this kind of field of the arts or the media arts or the new media, we all encounter this kind of crossroads where we had the feeling that we had to decide. And for example, like me, I went more into the science, and then I jumped into the arts. And I guess like, and why this happens, why this happened to me, I guess it's different than why it happened to everybody, and we all have this kind of like a different kind of story, but we all have a story, where we had a very good math teacher, or we all were validated at school because we were very good at drawing, or bashed because we were not good at drawing, or because, I don't know, or like our parents that put our drawings on the fridge, or perhaps you just have bad teachers or good teachers, and somehow all these things, they end up, when you have this person behind, on the other side, that encourages you and teach you math well or teach you philosophy well, you understand all the connections, and you get fascinated by it, and then you just want to follow. So yeah, it's interesting how somehow people go for science or go for the arts, or perhaps like in our department, which is this kind of like crossroads again, it's not a master where you specialize, but perhaps where you are looking for something else, like a lot of our students and the people that comes into our department, they just are not satisfied with their background or with their jobs, and they want to do something else. And I guess like it's a very interesting space where, in a way, it remains in the process of becoming. It remains a little bit undefined. I also did my PhD, and I guess like this is also the process that makes me articulate this idea of like maintaining infrastructure in that way. I heard that word also during all this work during the presentation. I've heard the word interstitial, and yeah, interfaces, interspecies. So a lot of a lot of prefix inter, a lot of in between, and also like liminal spaces. Also in artificial intelligence, but my PhD didn't really get there because it started before, and then you have to stick to your question. So my question was very clear, very stupid, perhaps. It's why do I care for indoor plants but let the rucola rot in the fridge? And I like this question a lot because it opens into a border, so a space in between me and the rucola, which happens within the borders, within the borders of my apartment, you know, of what I would consider the place where everybody is welcome and invited, you know. So this rucola is welcome and invited in my fridge, but at the same time, I don't fully believe in it, you know. So there is something there, and it's really interesting, the whole process of how something becomes a commodity and how we are structuring things, you know, and how the wording end up, you know, controlling and structure the way we perceive the world, you know, and why I let something die, but I take so much care of something else, you know, that is basically the same thing. For me, it became like really interesting, and then it opened like all these questions. So I don't need to relay so much on the exoticism of, you know, like really going too far away, but I can find already something really exotic and amazing within my apartment and inside of my fridge, unfortunately. But yeah, so going back a little bit into the lab and into work and what I consider my space of work, because also my apartment is my space of work, and one of the things of my ideas of what we want to do in our department, and I guess like it can be confirmed, is to create also this kind of like sense of community and responsibility where we are caring for each other and we feel a little bit home within the department and also within our labs or within our workspace. What is a lab? You know, that's, I guess, like the question that I made, and we all have different definitions, right? But it opens up to this idea of like workspace and science and so on. But if you go, like, one of the reasons why I perhaps wanted to be a scientist as a kid is this image. You know, it's like all your parents, they tell you, you don't want to end up like this. You know, like, not rich and famous, but, you know, like, not looking healthy. So, yeah, this is kind of like a very archetypical image of what is an artist in a traditional way, or at least the way this is viewed or this is promoted through traditional circuits of art market, no, of this kind of like mad genius in one elevated, you know. And here you see also the atelier kind of like morphing, or like him morphing into the atelier, where like the atelier becomes a representation of his own psyche, you know, and his own torment. Then you have this. Such a relief, you know, like 9 to 5, you're dressed in white, everything is clean, it's pristine, it's purposeful, you know. So yeah, I mean, by the way, this is not a scientific lab, but this is an art lab. This is Symbiotica in Australia. It's a lab that was developed by two bio artists. They found this lab precisely because it was not so easy for artists before to get into labs. This is something that started later, perhaps in the 80s and 90s. But yeah, and so that, yeah. But then you go to university, you start studying art, and then it starts getting messy again. Messy, perhaps like not really messy, although like this looks a little bit messy, but it gets messy, they start messing up with your head. And here you see Joseph Beuys lecturing a rabbit, a hare, like a wild rabbit, covered in honey. And this is a very interesting image because it represents a shift also in the art, where it was like less focused on this idea of like the single image, but it was shifting to more, perhaps like more conceptual formats or like ways of relating, or even like thinking about becoming a teacher as an art form, or you know, like putting objects together, you know, and not necessarily having to be like kind of elevated objects, you know, or things that you can sell as commodities, but situations, thinking on art also as a way of creating knowledge and situations and bringing people together and creating conversations, etc. So it's kind of like the premonition of artistic research. Then you go online. Then you get a computer, you get into internet, and then you start questioning like where you received, where you went to university, even, you know, because you have everything on the internet, right? It's really interesting. Yeah, you go online and then you find access to everything for free. You have open source software, you have open source hardware, you can create your own experiments, you have different kinds of communities, you have different kind of communities and forums and people that help you to move through your experiments. No? So in the end, you think like, I have everything here. Why should I go to university? And yeah, then you realize that you actually need these kind of communities, and then you need to be in a space where you are sharing and you are embodying this kind of like lifestyle, this kind of entanglements, and feeling them in your own body, but not only online. On the other hand, there are many things that you learn from open source network technologies, such as one, you know, in terms of like agendas and defining collaboration specifically, you know, is that the success of a collaboration is not based on an individual contribution, but on what they can all achieve together, right? And then also that sharing common agendas is not always relevant for a collaboration to be successful. And this word collaboration, co-creation, authorship, etc. is also like, I think like, I can relate also to your presentation before, when it comes to like how to define collaboration, right? So, in a way, I see it in that way, you know, it's like that it's not necessarily, you know, there are like people that have like different patches and they are interested in different things and like they are sharing some knowledge, but at the same time, I guess like what defines a collaboration is when something is moved in you, right? So it is perhaps unavoidable, the idea that you are instrumentalizing a tool like AI or like a hammer, but in a way, when you spend enough time with that hammer or with that pencil or with that paint or with that canvas, something happens there that brings you together, or that's something that transforms you, or where you lose yourself in it. And this is for me what I find really interesting, and where I think that you are learning, and in that process, I think that this is a successful kind of collaboration. I wanted to show this image because I guess like you probably all know that this is like the place where the first internet transmission happened, and this is also at UCLA, and you can see it in the corridors of the office spaces. It's also perhaps a lab, but it's an office space. And this was the first internet transmission between UCLA and it was Stanford University. And this image in particular, it became really iconic of like, to represent internet as well. And it's been repeated like for thousands and millions of times, because this, the only way to see this office is through a little hole that they made at the door. It's the only door in this corridor that has a little hole, and it's kind of like a museum, like a diorama, you know, what that is. And everybody comes and make that picture, so everybody has the same picture. So when you go on internet, it's a bit redundant, no? But it's also interesting to think like how images define things and structure our minds, you know, and structure culture. How like these images, they are so fixed in our minds, you know, and in the collective mind also through internet processes. Okay, I'm getting too long. And then the first Media Lab comes. This is MIT Media Lab, was the first Media Lab that happened. And this is a very interesting idea of what the lab is. Like, as I said, like this space for experimentation, where interdisciplinarity happens, you know, like people coming from different disciplines. Like normally in a factory you have kind of like a chain, you know, where like you have the designers, you have the engineers, you have the salespeople, you have the CEO, you know, like, and everything comes kind of like in a chain, like one after the other. Here we put everything together, you know, and sometimes for some kind of like acoustic reasons or like noise reasons and so on, you know, you have these kind of like glass panels. But the idea is that everybody is working together and that you can observe all these different processes, even if it's only with, you know, with the tip of the eye. But that you are not immersed in your own discipline, but you are collaborating and learning from the process. So it's a bit of a back and forth rather than a linear process of creation. No? So it's a bit like iterations, and I think like interactive art is also works through this kind of like feedback loops of iterations, you know, interdisciplinarity. Yeah, but as I said before, like when it comes to working in a lab or in a scientific lab, or when artists suddenly they are interested in working in science, but they don't know the language, and they are trying to get there, and they're trying to ask, or they send an email, maybe you don't get a reply, maybe they are not interested, maybe they are fearful. It is different, the artistic process or the artistic research, and the different circuits as well of fundings, you know, and validation. So it is, in a way, understandable and normal why sometimes the artist is not welcomed into a scientific lab. That's why places like this emerge. So it is interesting because when you think of collaboration in this kind of like symbiotic terms of like parasitic, you know, or like collaborative, you can see a difference there. You know? Like, so most of the time, even from both sides, an artist is considered like a parasite of the scientific lab because sometimes he just wants to like instrumentalize, you know, he just come and just want to like, they are fascinated by the aesthetics and this kind of the tools, the apparatus, I don't know, like, so it's so interesting. I think it's very valid, you know, to be fascinated by all these laboratory paraphernalia in order to approach these processes, but then you need to learn about it. You need to learn the language, and you learn the protocols and the etiquettes and the circuits, you know, and yeah, become friends, allies with them. But sometimes it doesn't happen. The other way around, it also happens, you know, when scientists see artists as visualizers of scientific processes. You know, sometimes, you know, scientists, they are not the best at storytelling. So this sometimes is kind of like a tricky situation where you can feel some imbalance, but where perhaps sometimes, you know, you can find inspiration in each other, and you can collaborate and you can work together. It depends. It depends on, as I said, you know, how much you are nourishing yourself from this collaboration or from these encounters. unless you are staying within your own expectations of it, right? I guess like when you say that you're an artist, people say, so you paint, no? This kind of thing, you know, like, especially scientists or people that they are not so much involved in the art, they take for granted that an artist is a person that paints or makes ceramics or makes sculptures, or like the traditional art, what you normally see in a museum, right? Modern art museum, rather than a contemporary art. Then there are other different kind of artists. Mary Magic here, American artist that lives in Austria now. They are separating a little bit from this kind of aesthetics, in which they see the laboratory also as a representation of power structures as well. So people like Mary Magic, or you know, that they align more with this kind of like DIY aesthetics and these biohacking movements, and working with unrepresented minorities sometimes. You know, they develop all the different kind of strategies where they prefer to use like everyday tools to develop their own laboratories or their own imaginaries of what the laboratory could be. And it's also this kind of like beautiful like portable laboratories and, you know, very creative ways of putting together things, right? And then you have something in between the two. And this is very representative. I guess you all know this project from Eduardo Katz. So Eduardo Katz is what is now considered a bioartist. And he's a little bit in between the two. Which means that he's collaborating with the laboratory, but he's not working in the laboratory. So he's basically arranging situations, and by ectopizing or like by tweaking or shifting or playing with these situations, he is pushing the borders of what is the familiar, what is invisible, or what should be visible, what is ethical, or you know, what is political as well. This project, it's basically a bioart project. It's not really a bio project. It's a procedure that already existed, so where they are inoculating a GFP protein into the DNA of the rabbit in order to make it glow under black light. This is a procedure that is very common in laboratories in order to make certain molecules glow under black light, just to see where they are going through the bodies of these species, whether they are fish or rabbit, but normally they use fish or transparent fish. So this is a procedure that already existed, right? What he did is he claimed that he had created a rabbit as an artwork. So it was like the first kind of like living artwork, and this would be like a new hybrid. So it was his own creation. So he played a little bit this kind of Frankenstein or like Dr. Jekyll or something like that, where like he claimed he had created this kind of like hybrid for like a new form of life, and that was his artistic creation. So kind of like playing to be God. This was not true. Actually, this is just a white rabbit. It's not even a hybrid rabbit working in the lab. But this procedure happened, and he collaborated with this lab in Paris to make this whole mediation of making these procedures public. So this was interesting because it creates a huge like media bombardment and repercussion. So he was largely criticized by this procedure, but the only thing that he did, it was like to visualize the procedure that already existed, but it was invisible. You know, because this rabbit doesn't really exist. It only exists within the borders of the lab. So, and what he tried to do at the end, and this is a little bit like the game of the magician, you know, the magician that you know shows you one hand while with the other is like stealing your watch or something like that. It's when like he was trying, he claimed he wanted to adopt the rabbit as a pet to bring it into his family. And of course, like this, absolutely not possible. You cannot take an animal that belongs to the lab outside of the lab for security reasons. But by doing so, he was playing with these borders, no? Of like the hybrid and the familiar, and he was like pushing this border. So yeah, in the end, it's really interesting how through processes like synthetic biology, you are boiling down matter to its most small atomic form, you know, and when you are doing that and through that process, the border of what is alive and what is not alive, and what is exists and what doesn't exist, you know, it becomes really blurry. And this is really interesting. This is this kind of like spaces in between. Also very interesting that for some reason, I don't know if this happened intentionally or not, but it reminds me a lot. It's the same picture, just like happening at different moments of time and history and scientific development. So, in order to digest all these, especially in our department, and the way I try to articulate all these different processes and how they happen within the lab space, I found this kind of like permacultural, you know, like permaculture, tend to go like from underground to the little ground, to the bush, to the tree, to the sky, you know, and all this in kind of like in cycles, right? I found this kind of like permacultural way of looking at the laboratory, defining processes, and this it's articulated, so it's like there's a order, but it happens very naturally because we need this kind of articulation for our processes. So it's the natural, the artificial, and the synthetic. You understand this separation, no? So natural is like what you don't know. What you don't know, the chaotic, what you cannot define, what you cannot see, what happens behind our realities, what we cannot define. Artificial is already like extracting this, like a tomato. A tomato is artificial actually, it's a crop, it's something like, it's man-made, right? And the synthetic, this kind of post-human, you know, where like it's already no longer a tomato, but it uses this kind of like, perhaps like different kind of like other forms of existing, like alien matter. It could be networks, it could be electromagnetic waves, it could be, yeah, non-carbon-based kind of matter, like silicon or like plastics, you know, or like things that are not artificial, neither natural. So we benefit from it in a way in which we can learn from this articulation, no? So for example, like with the natural lab, it emphasizes this kind of like slow process, long durational process, where engaging with the geological, with the microbial and the ecological process, So this allows us to decenter us as human from this temporality. So there are temporalities that they are like much wider than us. So we cannot grasp, we can't even understand. You know, it's this kind of like hyper object kind of idea. This is perhaps processes and different kind of research that they are like not available for us to observe, like soil, like mineral, like fungi, mycelium, roots, decomposition, fermentation, kind of like things that you need to put aside and let it happen, but you cannot observe. I just give you like some examples of processes like that happen within our department. I hope it's okay. So this is a project by Volkan, is one of our students, and it's very interesting because he created a clock that is powered by bacteria. So and it's quite interesting because it talks a little bit about the materialization of time, right? I don't know, like, but time or like why 1 second goes after another is very linked to material and the kind of like components and the quartz, you know, that is inside of our watch. So there is a very interesting link between time and its materiality, and it's represented also in this project. But this clock works differently. Another interesting process that is a little bit comic also is this installation by Lina that forces you to put your head inside of the ground in order to listen to the sound of the roots and the soil root system, basically. And it's amplifying and creating this kind of like acoustic installation, sound installation. And it forces you to make this kind of like, but the idea is that you become a plant as well, you know, this kind of like root system where your head becomes the root. It comes also from different kind of like forms of knowledge, like in yoga and so on, but basically the idea is that people were supposed to do a headstand, but instead they are showing their ass. So it's also interesting to think like when you are becoming ridiculous by, you know, like by entering another realm as well. What is, why? Also, Nor and other students that they are also interested in this kind of collaborations with things like mycelium and mushrooms, both for creating different kind of like experiments, but also as a food source or as a way to also create this kind of like relational situations, you know, of like cultivating the same food that then you are consuming, and other different form of collaboration that also happen, you know, when you are eating another living form, right? Artificial. So this focus a bit more on this kind of layer, you know, like digital technologies, data extractivism, you know, like trying to like put order and control a reality. So this difference between signal and noise, or like what constitutes data and what constitutes noise. So here it's a lot about like controlling the environment, and there are many different processes also that students and I also are very interested in. It could be gardening, it could be agricultural process, or creating hybrids. Not really going too much into DNA or gene editing, but just like normal forms. Also different ways of understanding and defining, you know, a world, you know, like language, interdisciplinarity, all this happening in kind of a room. So the human reality and human temporalities, no? The weather, the climate and the weather, different things like that. Also playing with humor. Here is also where the students, you know, they are always creating this kind of like intersections, you know, and they are like polluting, you know, all the infrastructure with their ideas and their creativity. So here, for example, it's an orchid, which also represents this notion of something exotic and beautiful per se. in a very kind of like banal way, almost. And this orchid has an Instagram profile, and every time that you like this profile, it gets flashed with water or light, so it gets fed through that process. You know, it's kind of ridiculous, but it's a reflection on these processes. This is also a very interesting project that it plays a little bit with this kind of imaginaries of or DIY experiments when we were kids and we were trying to gather energy from potatoes or oranges. So this one is trying to mine Bitcoin with artifacts that Cesar is creating, and they are powered through the lemons of the supermarket where we were exhibiting this project. So it needs lots of lemons. The synthetic, this is again, this kind of like post-human. And post is a little bit of a tricky word, you know, I don't want to really, but it's interesting also because it's a little bit cringe. You know? Everybody thinks it's, I don't know, we are afraid of it. And, but yeah, I mean, it's everything that is happening, that we are creating, very basic definition, and once we're gone, at least me, perhaps it's gonna still stay there. You know, so all or plastic leftovers, you know, all the infrastructure leftovers, all the things that they are still working while we're gone. Yeah, again, trying to remove angst from it and working with that. This is a very early project, actually happening during the pandemic where we were all, you know, left alone, and yeah, she was at home playing with AI and creating gardens based on her imaginaries and the images from the gardens from back home. She's from China but living in Munich, or at least during the lockdown. And then like projecting this into her own bed, right? So creating different kind of territories and creating different kind of spaces that they are also perhaps just in our imagination now, but they're interesting. I mean, that's the idea, to push the border, create new territories, expand our own territories, or finding new islands, you know, and then bringing them together. This perhaps a little bit more high-tech project where the student is creating his own electronic circuit inspired by the technology from early NASA technology from the 70s, but also like reflecting and being very inspired by these technologies and all these ideas and imaginaries of space exploration and what technology could bring into the world and into our imaginaries, and how technology can also be an inspiration. So in this context, sustainability is here redefined as a kind of like a circular system. A circular system and a circular ecological system, you know, of like decomposition, fermentation, decomposition, and perhaps like additive processes again, but also circular economies, you know, where economy and ecology is and should not be separated. It's the same thing. Then we think about experiments and how we are defining experiments. You know, thinking of experiments as kind of like artificial situations that require a specific space outside of our common reality, but we are shifting it. And in this case, we are thinking, you know, we are shifting the vitrine. basically. When you think about a vitrine as a space where there are two different kinds of vitrine. Imagine like a vitrine as a terrarium with a tarantula, no? And then there is a vitrine to protect you from the tarantula. But at the same time, there are other kind of vitrine. The vitrine where behind maybe there is something like a diamond or something really valuable, so it's trying to protect the diamond from you, from taking it. So there are two ways, to look into this vitrine as interface, and the same an experiment as an interface. It can be seen both ways. So in this case, what we are creating is basically a space where all these different kind of like modes of effect, they are suspended in a way so that the students, they can relate to their collaborators, whether they are living or not living, whether they are animals, plants, or tools or infrastructures, in a flatter way, without distinction, without this kind of like power structures of like victim and perpetrator, guilt. So it's this. So in that way, an experiment is here the same, but the other way around. So we are facilitating the possibility for experiments or situations or encounters that could not or should not happen elsewhere to happen there. So it's a little bit like merging together your home and the idea of a laboratory, right? So it becomes at the same time some kind of third space also. Third space as this idea of where all these different modes of knowledge and scales and realities, they are juxtaposed. Therefore, this idea of heterotopia, or the lab as an heterotopic space. And yeah. So yeah. And why is important, I guess, and this is a bit my conclusion, and it's related to this kind of like ectopic possibility, this idea of creating situations out of place. So perhaps we can all relate to certain contemporary anomalies, which is something that, and I'm going to read Martin de Prada, he calls the ectopic character of desire. It's when you feel out of place or out of space. Situations like anxiety, like digital dependency, like narcissism, and other kind of adaptive disorders that separate us and dislocate us, especially in our kind of like Western society. So according to Prada, this ectopic character of art, this possibility of pushing something out of place and creating situations out of place, or bringing an object out of space, which is a kind of like a now considered traditional way of looking into art, of understanding the language of art, would then have the capacity to ectopize these fields of desire, decentering them towards other territories that do not correspond to those directed by large corporations and imperialist policies. So these methodologies respond to these urgencies, this ecological and this economic collapse, ideas like toxic accumulation, technological alienation. So proposing this kind of like narratives of entanglements and collaboration in our departments, and also co-becoming, while also redefining the interface as and this space in between as a place for encounters. Top, yeah. That was more or less my last statement. Thank you. And of course, I didn't say that if there was any question or if you wanted to interrupt or something like that, you are, of course, like more than welcome. Sorry for this bombarding you with almost an hour. Is there any question?
So, in the end of the day, the most important instrument that really joins the art lab and the scientific lab and the hybrid lab and all of these vertical systems is coffee kettle, right? I mean, I remember your kitchen, so coffee kettle as a conclusion of the entire.
Yeah, our coffee machine is an ecosystem also in itself, I guess. But yeah, I think it's a very, I think that the coffee machine is the perfect example in our department. First, because it's quite complicated, so if you can manage without instructions, you're automatically accepted in the department. But also because it really becomes the center of this ecosystem and this system of community and this system of care and maintenance, because it's a machine that is very important for everybody. So it's very important that it's working, and if this machine is not working, you know, it's like our oxygen in the spaceship. Yeah. So it's really important. It should, therefore, it should be more taken with more care. But still.
Just quickly, do you find with your unique educational biography that you are able sort of to move between the science and the art in a way that's not extractive, and when you're working with students, are there certain soft skills that you find that they're developing while they're working in this interdisciplinary field? It's the end of the day. The question was, so do you find that when you're working in an interdisciplinary field with art and science, with students in particular, is there certain, given your educational background, where you were able to work in both in a lot of areas, is there certain soft skills that you are helping grow in the students that helps them work in science in a non-extractive manner? So in a non, to really immerse themselves in the science of the science.
I mean, my work is a little bit managing this infrastructure and trying to facilitate, right? But of course, I don't know much about everything. And that's it's this kind of like master of disaster where you have so many curiosities that you end up like not becoming like, or as soon as you, for some reason, I guess it also happens to a lot of us, that as soon as you become like really good at something, then it's automatically boring, Yeah. So yeah, taking for granted that not knowing is fun, and that making mistakes is fun, and that trial error methods work only if you go through trial, error, and then trial again. Not just like stopping there and get frustrated and then like next thing, and abandon something, but taking responsibility. But as well, like if there is any kind of curiosity, I try to at least, because for me it's really easy, and also this is also something of the benefits of being in such a small city like Linz, where everything is so approachable, and you just send an email and you get a reply, and this doesn't happen that often everywhere else. So for this kind of like art and science negotiations, it is relatively easy at a human level because people are really kind. So there's no fear. You should not be fearful, and if they are fearful, then I do the job, of like introducing you. But this is also what we do when we do like workshops abroad. It's always, they're almost kind of like excuses, just excuses to meet each other and to meet people. And for me, art is a little bit like an excuse to meet other people with the object in the center. But it's, you know, it's like the fire or the TV or the teapot or...
Thank you. Yeah.
Let's drink a beer.